Hello and welcome everyone to the second episode of the National Education Policy 2020 series, Impact and Implementation for Higher Education Institutions. The Indian government on 29 July replaced the 34-year-old National Policy on Education framed in 1986 with the new policy of 2020. The NEP, as we call it, approved by the Union Cabinet, makes sweeping reforms in school and higher education, including teaching. We will focus on the higher education institutions today as the success of the policy really boils down to its implementation. I'm Suman Bhaumik, your weekly host, and I lead the events for the IET in India. And with that, I shall request you to start the session and proceedings for today, Raghavan. Over to you.
Yeah, very good afternoon. Thank you, Suman. In today's session, we will be focusing on national education policy and its impact on higher education. The national growth intricately linked with its quality of education. For a lot of us, it has been a pathway to success. Poverty can be eliminated only through quality education. This is what makes today's discussion so much more important. My first question to all panelists is, how do you see the changes in higher education system? There are quite a lot of changes has been said. Students can take break in between the years, and then they have flexibility for 3 years bachelor's or 4 years bachelor's. There is academic bank credit, compulsory multidisciplinary vocationary course. All these are the kind of changes which has been proposed in higher education. So my question is, how do you see these changes? Is my open question to all the panelists. I would like to start with the women in the panel. Raki, can you share your views on this?
Absolutely. Firstly, thank you so much for having me part of the discussion, and good afternoon to everyone. For me, when I look at the policy, I welcome the change. I've been a very strong proponent, supporter of the fact that the approach to education requires an overhaul, and the NEP 2020 delivers completely on that. There are several things that I think about policy. Sorry. Yeah. Like I said, there are several things that I like about the policy, but the thing that resonates with me most is the multidisciplinary construct that provides the students with the flexibility and opportunity to experience and evaluate the different streams and make choices based on that. It's essentially allowing our students to be the navigators of their education journey and deciding what they want to do, the pace at which they want to do it, and the medium through which they want to do it. I think that's a fantastic achievement, and that's something that I wish I had growing up, but I'm very, very excited about the future generation. So that's the positive that I see. The one area that I think that requires more attention possibly is on the how and the when. The paper does talk about large milestones that we want to have in 2035 and 2040. But what it doesn't address immediately is the steps that we need to take today, tomorrow, 2 years from now, the kind of milestones that we need to achieve or adhere to so that we meet the timelines that we have identified. I think that's something that we should focus on. And then again, as a parent of a 12-year-old who's currently enrolled in the existing education system, I am still not clear whether my child will be able to leverage these changes. Will it happen in 6 years, or will I have to wait the entire 15 years or 20 years to see the changes? So, so that clarity on what happens when and to which set of users and students will be very, very useful. So that's what I have on my end.
Yeah, thank you, Raki. Professor Vaidya, I would like to hear from you on your opening remarks about the policy.
Thank you very much, IET, for inviting me to be a part of this very distinguished panel. And I see that the audience is also a very enlightened audience, and only organizations like IET can manage to gather such an enlightened audience. And thank you for the audience as well. My very brief opening remarks for some of you or most of you who are tracking my articles. I had written 3 articles for various newspapers, and all 3 of them welcoming the new education policy. The reason that I believe that this is a reform-based policy is because as I said in one of my articles, it's got the Midas touch, which has a gold mine of opportunities. And the expanded form of Midas is that it has modularity, interdisciplinarity, diversity, accessibility, and sustainability. The second important point that I want to highlight is the timing that we see this NEP is coming. Not only is that it's coming after a very long period, the second NEP was in 1986, while the first was in 1968. And the first one, for many of you, you know that that was when education was in the union list. And the 1986 policy document was education in the concurrent list. And this one, after a span of 34 years, has got some success stories as well as some learning curve experience of what went right and wrong in the previous two NEPs. So with that learning experience, it has tried to address some of the constraining factors and limitations for a complex country like ours. So I think there is a lot of learning experience that has been embedded in this NEP, and that's one of the reasons why I feel the timing is right, because this has just come after the Prime Minister has announced the Atmanirbhar campaign. And that's very important because the next decade we are going to see a global spend of closely around $10 trillion in education and training. That's going to see the enrollment of at least over 1 billion students in both school and higher education, and an annual addition of close to around 1.5 million teachers. So more than 100 million teachers will be added into the education ecosystem across the globe. And much of this growth is going to be triggered by Asia and Africa. And that's why I feel the timing is so appropriate that this NEP, in my view, has laid down the foundational pillars for India to project itself as a successful education model for the world. And the NEP has put in place certain foundational pillars on which the superdome or the super infrastructure needs to be built across the entire education value chain. And I see a lot of raw materials that are in place to build this superstructure for the foundational pillars that the NEP has laid.
Good afternoon or good morning to each one who has joined this webinar, and thanks to IET for making me a part of this panel and try to express some opinions that I get in my head. Obviously, as the other two speakers mentioned, the education policy, the new education policy, the third in the series that has come, is welcome step at this point of time. And the statements, normally in the policy statements, the statements are more philosophical. And the statements that are made, philosophical statements that are made in the policy are all very welcome statements. And the intent of all these statements are all definitely laudable. And we should be definitely lauding the intents. But probably the one point that always is there between what happens on ground and what the intent are. I wanted to mention this point in the last question which Raghavan sir had sent me, the challenge, and maybe I'll mention it now and probably re-emphasize that on the last thing, and that is from Niti to Raniti, Niti to Raniti, from the policy to the Raniti of implementation. I think that will be a thing which will be testing the implementation of this policy in, as Vaidya sir said, our complex country, and the education being a concurrent subject between states and the center, and those will be the big challenges that we see. Obviously, the policy is moving towards what I call as the flexibility of time, flexibility of place, and flexibility of courses and outcomes that we get. The policy also is moving towards the customization of the learning style, of your own learning style, to be able to be maximized and get what you need from this policy. with the bouquets and whatever that you want to do. And probably the policy also is moving towards always getting a credential from out of this system and not having any failure from the system. That is the flexibility that has been inbuilt into the policy. The other things in which I feel the policy is moving towards, is indicating towards, is more competition in the system, more emphasis on the quality in the system, more emphasis on the budgetary requirements of this system. Is definitely asking for 6% of the national budget on the education system, on the education systems, and it is focusing very much on the quality and also on the implications and the doing of internationalization in all its aspects of the education. It has touched on quite a few of all these points, and each one of these points have their implications on the government system of education or the private players in the education, as well as the in-between players between the government and the private sector of education. And it has implications and things that obviously will be the talk of the implementation phase, and how this conversion of the policy will happen into the actual regulations, and this actual regulation getting implemented into the system afterwards. But overall, the policy is welcome. And we will all be very excitedly watching the impact and the implementation aspects of this policy in the future.
Thank you, sir. Sean, your opening remarks. How do you see this policy and your views?
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm honoured to be here, and greetings. I'm joining you from the UK. I'm going to echo what I think a lot of my colleagues have already said, I think, so I'll do that briefly. I also welcome the changes set out in the policy, and in particular the holistic nature of the approach. The fact that the NEP looks at early childhood through schools, colleges, and universities, I think is really, really important. I really welcome the emphasis on equity and inclusion. It's something we're working hard on in the UK. Still got actually quite a long way to go. Actually, a very long way to go. But I think it's absolutely the right thing to do, and really welcome that. Specifically for higher education, I also welcome the move to a more disciplinary approach to education at the undergraduate level. I think that's really, really valuable. I think we can narrow people's horizons too early in the education system, and as the document says, often creative ideas, new developments come at the boundaries, come at the intersections between different disciplines, and we shouldn't look to pigeonhole people very narrowly as engineers or scientists from too early in their education.
Sure.
I'm really pleased to see the emphasis on student experience and flexibility for students. I think that's really welcome. I think other things that stand out for me, institutional autonomy, I think really, really helpful, coming from a system where that's obviously very highly prized. Again, as someone from the outside looking in, and I have worked a bit in India and with Indian HEIs, I certainly welcome the more consistent categorization of institutions. I find how some of the categorizations of institutions quite difficult to understand from outside the UK. So I think that's outside India. So that's for me really helpful. The focus on leadership and governance, I think, is really important. Universities and colleges are complex organisations operating in a complex external and very dynamic external environment, and so that focus is, I believe, correct. I welcome the statements around the funding of teaching and research, because I believe that universities, fundamentally, we are about the generation and transmission of knowledge, and have a really important role to play as we all work through for example, the COVID global pandemic.
Thank you. I want to go to Professor Kincha now. The NEP says that the future there will be only two kinds of higher education institutions, the university and autonomous degree granting college. And the policy also says the transition will be aimed to achieve this in the next 15 years. My question is how the higher education institutions can prepare for this change, and especially the affiliated college system, how they can prepare for their transition. Your comment.
I know this question came to me because I was heading an affiliating type of university, the Vishweshwaraya Technical University.
Yes,
and that must be the reason I get this question. But the NEP says that the higher education institution will be categorized under either what they call as a research university, or a teaching university, or an degree granting institution. This is the classification that they have done. I have a general comment on this classification also, in the sense that, to me, the education category, research and training cannot be separated. And that is a subject that we can debate on how to do this. Even the education policy in its next paragraph says something about this, that it doesn't mean that research university will do only research or teaching university will do only teaching, but they will do both teaching and research in some sense.
Yes.
But this mapping that comes with the name research teaching, research universities and teaching university, probably is something which we need to debate on this. As far as the affiliating type of systems that is concerned, and the impact that this will have, in my judgment, will be the affiliating type institutions will either get clubbed into or becoming an independent autonomous institution if they have the size, to become an independent autonomous institution, following the norms of all the autonomy that will be laid out or are presently laid out and in the future modified. The second possibility is the speciality of RECA, that is the mergers and acquisitions. And probably I foresee mergers and acquisitions in different forms in the educational network to get at the size of these institutions which is being contemplated, and how this mergers and acquisition and the policy of what we call as the cluster systems that we have today. So the affiliating system will come into what I was telling is the cluster or the merger and acquisition phase, which will be an interesting part, because they have to get the size required for becoming what we call as the autonomous institution of the big stage. In addition to this, the main issue will be the quality improvement of these institutions, because of the thing that we will be getting, that is the credit transfer bank will be created, and the students getting out of this system will be a part of the overall system of the quality, and that will be again a big challenge, as it is today also for the affiliating system, the improvement of the quality and everything that the regulatory body today are doing. For example, the AICT's 10-point plan for quality improvement of engineering and the pharmacy and the management institutions, and everything is moved towards that, and probably that will become much more important for the affiliating colleges in the future. And the last point in this that I wanted to say is that the governance structure change which is proposed, in this colleges becoming a sort of what we call as the autonomous degree giving colleges, will be that this governance structure will become a legally bound governance system. Even though, yes, the autonomy is welcome, but it will be a legally bound systems, and the implications of this on the running of the institutions and the effects that this will have from the different players of the governing systems onto the education system will be very interesting to watch in the future.
The goal of increasing the GRE, the gross enrollment ratio, from 26% to 50% is what is being planned in the NEP. And to move all the higher education institutions by autonomous by 2035. Both the goals, it's not an easy task. The private higher education institutions will have a major role to play to make sure this is reality. What do you think the role and contribution of private higher education system in the emerging model?
Yeah, if you just take a step back to understand the role of private institutions and higher education, they have been very significantly contributing to the GER growth that we saw in the last decade. And that's why we are talking about 26 to 28% as on date, which now is the expected target rate is 50%, which is achievable. And the role of private higher education institutions is also getting even more significantly important. But it is a collaborative effort of public institutions, private institutions, and as well as certain PPP models that has ensured this growth so far. And moving forward in the same proportion, if not more or less, I think this is achievable because the NEP has opened up the access to different forms of degree programs within the same portal of an institution. No longer are we going to characterize a university as an engineering university or a business management education university, or we are going to kind of characterize it based on just certain subjects and disciplines.
Sure.
So that barrier is going to get removed because of the spirit of interdisciplinarity in the higher education pursuits that universities, actually university by definition itself has to be very comprehensive.
Yes.
And all along we have not had the benefit of being that comprehensive. And this NEP is moving those barriers out and encouraging universities to offer different streams of higher education programs. That way you will see a multiplier effect. The second important instrumentality that can trigger this growth in GER is also the opening up of online and distance education programs, because that is giving access as well. But it doesn't mean that online is going to replace the conventional institution. So the brick and mortar model will continue, while the bits and bytes model will have its own critical stakeholders who become learners. So it's going to be a two-track approach, each of them independently running and achieving the desired objectives for their individual track. But one important thing that will be catalyzing this change is no longer is the online mode in India going to be consumer centric, in the sense that we are not going to we will not be just like that consuming courses from Coursera or edX or other such MOOC platforms. Rather, we will be contributors and creators. So that is the empowerment that will be given to universities. And the recent announcement that 100 universities can start online programs is kind of an empowerment to contribute to the online value chain. Because creating access is easy, bandwidth, infrastructure, relatively easy, and we just consume certain assets that are created elsewhere. As Professor Phatak in IIT Bombay used to say, if access is the measure of success, then librarians would have been the most intelligent person in the world because they have access to all books in the library. But the way in which the process is cannulated, empowering universities to create their own digital assets and then offer creative programs in the online platform, is in my view going to accelerate the growth of GER, and hence this dual approach of a multidisciplinary based university with ODL as a catalyzing agent is definitely going to play a significant part in public, private, progressive private higher education institutions in achieving this GER. In my view, it is achievable.
Thank you so much. I'll start with the second question first, and then I'll get into technology. I think when I read the NEP, it wonderfully lays the building blocks for this collaboration between institutions and industry. This is by the fact that they have clearly categorically said there should be support of startup incubation centers, tech centers, or centers which are relevant to the research that the institution is doing. And the second important aspect is the facilitation of internship programs with businesses. I think these two are important aspects that they have introduced and that can be used and built upon for this partnership. What I also feel is the institute then needs to define a framework that they that helps them to identify what are the areas of research and partnership they want to get into. There is enough literature in the world that says that if done well, this partnership can be mutually beneficial for all parties involved. It can help in producing groundbreaking research, innovation. It helps us to solve complex problems. It drives economic growth. It also creates more skilled workforce. However, as all things, this is not very simple and straightforward. We are dealing. The implementation is always not. Implementation of this partnership is always not that easy, and this is primarily related to the fact that we are dealing with institutions and industry which are large, they're complex, and they operate differently. They are organized differently. They have different pace. And when you look at setting up a partnership, it has to be based on communication, trust, and common goal. I mean, there is a lot of potential here that we could leverage on the fact that if we can combine the decision or the discovery-driven culture that we see in the university with the innovation-driven environment of the industry, it would be fantastic, right?
Sure.
I think another aspect that plays a pivotal role is the faculty. I believe research faculty now needs to put on the entrepreneur hat and think and actively go and seek out these industry partners, pitch to them ideas and values, and then try and develop sustainable business models. I think all of this will help us to move forward. I think we have been waiting for this opportunity. It's just a matter of kickstarting it and getting it going. I think that's second part of your response. The first one was related to technology. I think technology is pivotal. I mean, even the NEP states that categorically. They have emphasized the importance of technology. They have identified that it to be very critical in the implementation going forward. Just not only in terms of education in outcomes, but also in the processes. So what they have done, I think, is the direction the right is a step in the right direction. It is to do with setting up a autonomous body, the National Education Technical Forum. I think that in itself is a great initiative because it is a forum which is defined to be a place where ideas can be discussed on how to use technology, not only for education, but for assessment, for administration, the whole lot. And it's again a great opportunity for the tech savvy part of India. You know, we have so many tech entrepreneurs. We have so much that we're doing in the education sector. It is a great opportunity for all of us to come in and work together on ideation and development. So I think these steps in the building blocks are all there, and technology is going to be critical as we move forward.
Sure. Thanks, Raki. Sean, I want to hear from you the changes that are proposed in the policy, like a regulatory body setup, full autonomy to the higher education institution, thrust on accreditation. All these are something the UK education system went through 2 decades before. According to you, what were the challenges and the learnings while implementing these changes, which you can share with Indian education?
Firstly, just as I mentioned earlier, institutional autonomy and free speech are very highly valued and prized by universities in the UK. However, as Professor Kincher has pointed out, government is still able to exert significant influence through the way it allocates funding and also the way it regulates.
Sure.
Now, at the moment, education policy is a devolved matter in the UK. So there are different approaches to regulation for the sector, the higher education sector, across the nations of the United Kingdom. So different approaches in England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. The approach to regulation in England was established in 2017, and it's something called it's done by an organisation called the Office for Students, the OFS, and the OFS mantra is all about positive outcomes for all students, and it regulates first of all by higher education providers have to be registered with the OFS if they wish to access government funding, and if they wish to access visas to recruit international students. And as an example of give an idea of the scale, there are about 400 higher education providers registered in England with the Office for Students. Just over 100 are universities, so it is quite a large organisation. So it maintains a register, and that register has essentially a set of initial and ongoing conditions of registration that include things like access and participation, quality and standards, financial sustainability, good governance, and so on. So there's a bunch of criteria that institutions have to meet.
Sure.
There's also essentially a set of national metrics which are very much used to drive initiatives such as the Teaching Excellence Framework. So there is a national survey of graduating students called the National Student Survey.
Sure.
That's used as a proxy for measuring student experience. We have national metrics around progression and achievement of good degrees. So these measures are used by the regulators and have benefits. So one of the things that the regulator will do is look at achievement of different groups of students. So we'll look at progression of let's say students from disadvantaged backgrounds compared to students from more advantaged backgrounds. And they do that by postcode area, zip code area. I'm not sure what the term you would use. So there's a real focus on students, but actually some quite crude measures, and the things like the National Student Survey are quite contested. Not everyone. The questions are debated. Everything's debated in higher education. We also have, to accompany the system of regulation, a now well-established framework of standards and guidance around how we operate our degree programs. Most of these are developed and operated by the Quality Assurance Agency for Higher Education, the QAA. We have things like the UK Quality Code for Higher Education, which sets out a whole set of expectations around how degree courses are managed, reviewed, subject benchmark statements, which set out the expectations around particular subjects. We have a qualification and credit framework, because we also have our degree programs are credit rated, and in theory at least, credit is portable.
Sure.
And we have quite active professional, statutory and regulatory bodies, so PSRBs, who accredit and approve provision in professional vocational areas, often as the foundation for later professional practice. Wonderful. So there's quite an elaborate structure there. It's now quite well developed. There were some initial settling down problems, and aspects are debated and contested endlessly. So
wonderful.
I'm sure there's great models for you there.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of interesting information. Thank you, Sean. I want to go to Professor Kincha now. All these changes, what are we talking about? This all revolves around the teachers and the professor who are going to take these implementation challenges to the students. In terms of skills, what do you think? What are the changes the professors and the teachers they need to undergo to manage these changes?
Most difficult question. changing the attitudes of people is the most difficult thing to do. But let me try to address what is. Obviously, everybody knows that the fulcrum of any higher education systems are the teachers.
Yes.
In whatever way that you want to look at. You look at the excellence, you look at the quality, you look at the output of the university. I think it is all centered around the university and the faculty of the university.
Yes.
And that sometimes gives me the question, the university, is it for the faculty or is it for the students? Well, that question is another question to answer. But one thing is for sure, let me take one side of this question of what skill sets or what type of improvements needed for the teachers. If I were to make a rough calculations, in Karnataka alone by 2035, we should be having around 250 institutions of the university type of the research or teaching or the autonomous institutions. And in the country, these numbers may go around to 9,000, 10,000 in these things. And we are looking at the leadership of these institutions and the board memberships of these institutions. Today, we find it difficult to get for the 900 institutions the leadership positions. I think there is a great gap that will be created by this type of things. And there will be definitely a need right from now to create skill sets. Now, if I start to define the skill sets, obviously I get into the question of the subject-based skill sets that I need to improve in the teachers, or the agnostic type of skill sets that I need to develop in the teachers, things. And I should definitely mention here again an initiative of AICTE, which it has already started. To me, it is very revolutionary in the sense that a compulsory teacher training program for teachers in the system at all levels, not just the young entrants into the system, but also people in the system at the levels of senior assistant professors or associate professors or professors in the system. And when you talk about the agnostic skill sets that we're talking about in teachers, the question that comes is definitely, what are these agnostic skill sets that a teacher needs during the career of 30-35 years? And AICT has now done quite a fantastic job of trying to define or trying to get the agnostic skill set requirements of teachers in terms of learning about the governance systems, the financial systems, the research and training doing methods and interactions, then advanced pedagogy systems, AR, VR, then the partaking in economic activity by university and how to do it, whether it is the incubation, entrepreneurship, and all other activities and the leadership requirements for that, or trying to talk about the leadership and policy issues of the faculty development, or quality benchmarking systems that we need with the teacher needs as the agnostic skill sets as they move up in their careers, And I think the efforts have already started by AICTE in trying to impart training to our teachers in these areas, so that at least there is a first level attempt by AICTE for trying to get people to move into the field of their choice, whether it's research or innovation, or whether it is governance structure, or whether it is the entrepreneurship sector. The teacher can choose the path that they want to go and acquire these these skill sets in the future for this. Now, how do we get this? I think it's a thing of implementation. I'm sure this new education policy also may come up with new type of attacking this problem. Thank you.
Sure. I know it's a very vast topic, sir. We can talk about this in the entire session about the faculty skill set.
Yes.
But you summarized it well. Thank you very much. I want to go to Professor Vaidya now. Professor Vaidya, there was a plan to introduce vocational education in school and continued in the higher education. There is a perception in the society that if an economically poor section children acquires vocational skills in the early stage, they will start working and they may not continue the higher education. So how do you see this?
Okay, so you've actually started off with a perceptual distortion. I would say that this vocational education is now rightly positioned that a part of it begins with school education. Some part of it is also integrated with higher education, because vocational education was in a very uncomfortable sandwich between school and higher education, each of them thinking that it is not theirs.
Correct.
So now, to a certain extent, it has been addressed by introducing certain elements of vocational education at the school level and at the higher education level. The second thing is, I have always seen the society as an open air university, and much of the wealth generation that has come has been from those who are in the unorganized workforce, who are the ones who are possessing these skills, and they are craving for an academic recognition. But on the other hand, we have a very regimental regulatory framework that says, diploma education, vocational education, all this has to go through a certain set of approval mechanisms, which the new education policy has addressed. And my expectation in the implementation stage is that there should not be any approval mechanism for vocational education. Universities must be empowered to give diplomas, certificates, skill development programs without the need to get approval. It has to be fully empowered in the hands of the universities. And as far as I know, there are so many of the skilled workforce to whom universities have to go and run and offer the diploma because they have so much of skill set and they don't have to necessarily come to universities.
Correct.
Likewise, we need to only identify such talent, polish them, give them with some life skills and award those diplomas. To that extent, an empowerment is necessary because we are living in a society that always asks those achieving vocational skill people what you have studied. But at the same time, we never ask somebody who has studied so much, what have you done? Now, that paradoxical situation is getting addressed here, where we are empowered to give an academic identity to a vocational ability that already exists, and universities are to be empowered to certify that critical skill which is the economic spine of our country, and identifying such skill sets at the early stages. There is considerable opportunities at the school level that provides that flexibility of a student to choose different tracks, not necessarily this triangulated track of engineering or medicine, but a more broad-based approach towards different skill-based education. To that extent, there is a window of opportunity. How much of that window is going to open up so that we get the environment of certain policy benefits? The secret lies in the implementation plan.
Yes, wonderful. That's interesting. I want to ask the same follow-up question to Sean. There is a similar apprentice scheme we have in UK. Do you have the similar issue in UK on this?
Okay. Thanks, Raghavan. As a former apprentice, I'm always happy to talk about apprenticeship programs. I had a very unusual journey to my current role and didn't do the normal kind of high school type route. So I started working when I was 16 as an apprentice electronics technician. I think one of the challenges we have in the UK is that the college sector, which does really, really important work, has been underfunded and undervalued. Now, because we at one point had an aspiration of 50% of young people going to university or experiencing university. What about the other 50%? And that's really, really important. And we know, if we think about engineering, we need a highly skilled technical workforce. We need highly skilled people in administrative and support roles. So those roles are really, really important. There is the current government policy is to encourage businesses to take on apprentices, and these are apprentices at all kind of educational levels, ranging from at one level tradespeople working in the construction industry, for example, plumbers and electricians and bricklayers, but also increasingly degree level apprenticeships, which can actually be at master's degree level. People involved, for example, in there's a senior leader degree apprenticeship, which is at master's degree level. There was and the government has been really keen to encourage apprenticeships and vocational routes as a different but equally valuable route into the workforce. But as I said earlier, I think we've absolutely got to fund those programs properly, and certainly in the UK, or certainly in England, the college sector has been underfunded over many years.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. I want to go to Raki now. Very important issue, Raki, funding. On the one hand, there is a pressure on the government to increase the spending of 6% of the GDP, which most of us, we agree on it. So on one side, we want to increase the spending to 6%. On the other side, very important issue I see is the average spending per student from the government is higher than the private. So there seems to be a need for better utilization of funding. So your thoughts on two aspects. One is how to increase the funding. The second is how do we ensure the return of investment are met?
All right. I should say this is a very relevant question, and I will try to share my perspectives. I'm not an authority, but I will share what I understand and also lean on my corporate experience to try and answer this. I think when we talk about funding, I mean, it's a universal problem. It's not isolated to India, but the problem that we have in our country is that we've identified 6% long time back, but we've not unable to reach that. The NEP policy this time re-emphasizes that and say that they will work with the center and the state to make sure that we at least spend up to 6%. I personally think 6% will not be enough, but it's a start. At least we need to get there. The intent is there, and my concern right now is that with the current pandemic and the stresses that we have on economy, we might default and say, okay, we can do it later, and I believe that will be a major setback for us. So we need to kind of exert the right pressures to make sure that it happens now and not later, because it will impact the implementation that we have thought through. So right now, I'm not giving you answers. I'm just giving you guidelines. So the intent is there. The policy talks about it. The policy also talks about research foundation and giving grants, which I think is right. I want to go back to my earlier point and to pick up what Professor Sean was talking about. Industry partnerships can play a pivotal role. We know that when we partner with industries, we're trying to work with them in areas, trying to solve problems. It could be an alternate source of funding. And to kind of talk about skills and vocational training, again, there are, if you look at the way we envisaged the setup, we're talking about region-specific, geography-specific universities, multidisciplinary centers to be opened up. In that geography, you will have industries that require a certain kind of skill set. If we have better collaboration, we could have a curriculum tailor-made to cater to the requirements that help both the industry and the society to try and, again, these are great ideas. Implementation is where the key is, but these are things that we could investigate. One area that perhaps we don't really talk about much is the government kind of giving more flexibility to institutions to raise, invest, and create a corpus fund that they can use for their own research. The other area, we know education is a highly profitable business, but legally maybe we should allow it to be a private for-profit investment in education. I mean, maybe we should look at that and find more innovative methods to try and get funding. So that's on one aspect. I don't know if I've completely answered your question, but I've tried to give guidelines on what we could think about. On the other aspect, we talk about utilization, efficiency. I mean, this is something that we deal with in corporate every day, and it all comes down to. I mean, I'll kind of divide it into two: the process side of it and the efficiency side of it. From a process, we need to move to a digital system of financial governance. Everything has to be digitized. It has to be transparent, and based on performance. Based funding. Like we are constantly and corporate pushed on performance. Every metrics define how well we will do when we go to the next stage. I think the same kind of rigor needs to be put in for institutions to get funding, and also I think one important aspect here is transparency. We've talked about autonomy. Of course, it has to come through. We should have a completely autonomous systems where universities where we are able to hire the right talent. I think Professor Kincha also talked about it about getting there's a gap that exists today. How can we best leverage from the best minds around and get the most qualified for the job, the right position, right? So that itself will help in parts of the implementation we look at, right? So transparency, having metrics, those are aspects that I would focus on. And from an efficiency perspective, I would say, again, going back to corporate, have metrics for evaluation, for salary, for promotion, for teachers when we talk about it. Have metrics for assessment, which are very broad based. It is to do with attendance. It is to do with how much you self-educate yourself. How many hours of training are you looking at? It could be towards peer reviews. So it gives you a whole 360-degree perspective of how we are doing, and it will also help incentivize teachers to and give them a clear path of growth and moving forward.
Sure.
Having said all this, just want to reiterate, at the center of all this lies the ability of us to provide the rigorous training and mentoring that the teachers require. So we have to have that fundamental in place. I mean, efficiencies can come in, everything can come in, but we need to go back and ensure that we have that in place.
Sure.
I hope I tried and answered some part of your question.
Yeah. Thank you. On the same part of funding, I want to bring up Professor Vaidya. Professor Vaidya, you shared some ideas on how the spending can be more than 6% of GDP. I want your comments very briefly.
Yeah, thanks for allowing me to just interject here. Raki made a provocative statement that, education is a profitable business and it could also be declared for profit as a policy. But world over, education is for public good and it is, a not for profit making entities world over the policy mechanism. But having said that, to address specifically on the 6% of GDP, see, we must understand that the global average of 8% or 9% of GDP, we are comparing India with a set of different countries where education is a public duty. Where take for example UK. Or Germany or Canada or many of these countries, education is driven by the public machinery. Except for North America's, very rarely you see private higher education institutions in these countries. So there the share of GDP has to be higher because the participation from private in higher education is substantially low, and in some cases there is no participation. Now, if you look at India, you have to look at 6% of GDP beyond just the government spend. It has to also see how much of private enterprise is also put in education. And if you are able to collate all the CSR that corporates put in education, all of that, I'm sure the spend on education is substantially higher than the 6% of GDP that we are talking about. And secondly, you see our tax to GDP ratio is somewhere around 22 to 25%. So we cannot keep on, asking 8%, 10%. Then where will we have the money? The government has the money from tax collection to spend on, defense, healthcare, utilities. So there is equal pressure on the government to spend on other services as well. So two quick responses to that as a solution is, you see, we should have a consortia-based approach where public institutions and top 100 private institutions have access to foreign capital, foreign debt, where the government underwrites as a sovereign guarantee, we can get foreign dollar loans at very competitive prices, because today a dollar market is searching for better investment opportunities. So we can get loans at 2%, 3%, and you should move the consortia based approach where there is a sovereign guarantee from the government that selects only top institutions that can access to such capital. Sure. Secondly, the student education loans are priority sector lending. But RBI must take a different look and also say that even if education institutions are creating infrastructure, that also has to be qualified as priority sector lending. Just like student loans or agriculture or other priority sector, even educational investment by institutions on infrastructure, if it is categorized under priority sector lending, there is more incentive to borrow, and that will increase the investment in education. So these are my two quick responses.
Wonderful. That's quite interesting. Thank you, Professor Vaidya. I want to go to Professor Sean. Sean, I have two parts of the question. The NEP says top 100 universities in the world can set up campuses in India, and Indian universities are allowed to set up campuses abroad. The question is, how many of the top 100 universities are aspiring to set up campuses in India, and what about all the other next level international universities who are desired to set up campuses in India but currently are not allowed? The second question is very important for me. My personal favorite is students currently are allowed to do short-term courses, projects in international universities, and the education policy allows them to transfer credits. So it's not required a student need to do a full program. They can do a short course and then come back and do it here. How does this particular opportunity seen by international universities?
I read that part of the document with considerable interest, actually. I think that branch campuses are one very specific way of delivering transnational education. A university setting up an overseas campus. I can't answer your question about how many of the top 100 will want to do that. Okay. It's quite clear that the very top universities in the UK have chosen not to do that thus far. Oxford, Cambridge, Imperial College, the like, have chosen not to do that. I think it would be far better to look at collaborative models where institutions from India and overseas partner in different ways, perhaps to open a campus, perhaps around joint degrees, perhaps around credit accumulation and transfer, as you say. I think those collaborative partnership models can bring benefits to both parties. So, for example, my own university, Middlesex University, we have campuses in Dubai as a sort of hub in the Middle East, and we have a campus in Mauritius as a sort of education hub on the edge of Africa. Both of these are joint ventures, and both work really, really well. I think there's there are many more benefits to collaboration, and I think it's better for institutions to partner and work together in imaginative ways rather than just think of I think the branch campus thing is very narrow and maybe a little bit dated as an idea, and particularly when you have such fantastic institutions in India. So that would be my thoughts on that.
Any quick comments on the second part, which I asked? Students are allowed to do credit, the projects, and they can transfer credits here. How does the international?
I think that in a sense, I suppose in my mind, I'd wrap that up into the first answer. I think that could very easily be a really effective model for collaboration, and because it will work. I think it will work both. It will work both ways. We could have, for example, if I think about the UK, students from the UK. Maybe travelling to India, but perhaps working with a group of students from an Indian institution on collaborative projects, understanding international business, different cultural contexts. I think there's some really interesting opportunities, and so those were the things that I would be really keen to explore, rather than kind of buying or building bricks and mortar. I think we can do much more interesting things, and ways in which all parties to the collaboration benefit, rather than University of X building a campus, teaching students, and then repatriating the money back to their own country. I think that's quite a narrow. We don't want another East India company.
Sure. Thank you, Sean. That's very interesting. My final questions to all the panelists: what is that one point you think the government missed or reconsidered or very extremely challenging to implement? I want to start with Professor Kincha.
Raghavan, with your permission, I will just take half a minute.
Sure, sir.
On the last point that was discussed on the foreign universities coming in, with your permission, and then come to your question that you talked about.
Sure, sir.
The 2 points that I wanted to make there is that why will these 100 institutions come here? They went to Middle East, they went to some other countries, but that was because the government provided a lot of subsidies to come there. And whether the government will provide subsidies in this case is a very big question that we have to talk about. This is one thing. The second point that I would like to say is that the protecting of the brand cost, the cost of protecting the brand of these big universities versus the money that they make out of this system here will be a very big comparison that will happen. And that will be too small a sum from India at this point of time versus the losing or protection of the brand of these big institutions. These are the two important questions that will be making the decision on this thing, is what my feeling is. Now I'll come to your last question, that is the final point. And I did mention in my opening remarks that I will definitely mention the quote by, or what Prime Minister Modi said when he introduced the education policy to the nation. Niti se Raniti. Niti se Raniti. From the policy to the Raniti, or what I will do with that policy. I think that will be the biggest challenge for the education policy. Now, some other things that I thought that we should be talking about at this stage in this context will be, one will be, in the same context of Niti se Raniti, is if you were to see that we have two documents in front of us. The 2019 document of the education policy, the draft education policy as it was called, and now we have the 2020 policy as adapted by the cabinet of the country. I think it will be very interesting to do a comparison of these two documents. It will be very, very interesting to do a comparison of these two documents and to visualize the changes that have happened from the draft document to the final document. If I were to just give an example, if we were to try to Google some words like autonomy, Takshashila, UGC, AICTE, or the flexibility, I think the number of times these words have been used in the final document has reduced quite a bit. I think this is one indication to me of the mindsets of how the implementation may happen in the future. And I think that we have to keep track, because that is the policy that we have, and we can work on those constraints. The organizations like MCI, law, agriculture have gone out from the final document. And that is again a thing that we have to be pondering about. Some points that I thought would be good, even though it may not be a part of the policy, but maybe included in the policy somewhere or other, will be, for me, the classic issues that the education system always faced. The issues of quality versus quantity, the issues of price and cost, the issues of equity and excellence, and the classic issues of public versus private. These have been put only in philosophical statement. I think the sorting of these four classic issues in education sectors will always remain the dilemma, which will come in the opposite directions of the implementation. All these words come in this.
Wonderful.
Two more points, sir, if you permit me.
Yes, sir.
I think the other point that to me is very important for me that we should be thinking about is the impact of digitalization, as the Industry 4.0 is talking about, the effect of digitalization on education. Not just the digitalization of question paper valuation, that is all very simple. But the overall impact of digitalization on the education system will be a very critical thing in my judgment.
Sure.
The other thing that will be critical is the definition of the new efficiency measures that we will need in the education to be defined. The new efficiency measure moving from the numbers and quantity to the degrees and quality. And how do I define these numbers will be a very important step in the overall growth that I will get in the education sectors.
Yes.
The last point that I wanted to make was that probably we'll have to move towards the what the measures of not what the university gave to the student, but what the students gave to the university. And how do I do these measurement matrices? That will be a very interesting challenge in my judgment. And if I were to see the virtual education or the online education that has come, probably to me, an interesting part will be the effect of this online education on the creativity component, It is not the subject matter component which is important. It is the creativity component of the student. And how will these impact in the long term will be a very interesting part of my study. Thank you very much, sir.
Sure. Thank you, sir. That's wonderful to hear. If I can ask Professor Vaidya quickly about your comments.
Just two quick policy measures that, according to me, is wishful thinking that could have found a place. As Professor Kincha rightly mentioned, the conspicuous absence of agriculture, medicine, and law. See, we are moving from a STEM-based to a STEAM-based, which includes agriculture, and I'm just extending it further to STEAMish to include, social science and humanities as well. So when that's the order of the day in which the contours of higher education are getting defined, then if you have a flavor of interdisciplinarity in your NEP, then definitely you should have a pathway to also integrate with the MCI, the Medicine Council of Medical Council of India, the Bar Council of India, the IACR. So these are separate statutory bodies which have to be integrated into the NEP because they are outside the NEP orbit as we see it as a policy document. The second important thing is all along we have been having an outlay-based approach where percentage of allocation funds, all outlay, this much percentage to here, there. Now we need to shift to an outcome-based approach. So we need to have a proper metric as to how we can follow an outcome-based approach that measures the progress of students, of faculty, of institutions, and that is why in not only the 2019 draft, if you go back to the TSR Subramaniam Committee draft recommendation, there was a mention of Indian Education Service, IES, which is not here in this document. But I'm not saying that it has to be another, an IAS type body, but at least an IES that can audit the education ecosystem on an annual basis, where a student, a faculty, or an institution submit annual returns saying that, what have they done for the self-improvement? What have they done for the institution's improvement? What have they done for the society's improvement? And that self-introspection as a mandatory audit, I think, will improve and motivate all stakeholders to do more and incrementally add to the value that this entire education value chain can create. These two, I think, can be a part of the NEP. Not that this is the final document. In 1986, it was also, it was supplemented by a 1992 Plan of Action. So likewise, this NEP 2020 can always build up on certain incremental learning experience as we go by and add more elements to the document.
Sure, wonderful. I want to hear from Ms. Raki. What do you think the challenges or one thing the government should reconsider? Very quickly and briefly.
Okay, the operative word is quick. So I have two things, and again, I'm drawing from my own experiences. One, we have talked a lot about digitization and everything, and I think it's important for us to understand how are we going to address the digital divide. We want to have online education, we want access, so that aspect needs to be considered and mapped in line with the progress that we expect to have with the implementation plan. It is to be able to provide the students from underprivileged backgrounds with either smartphones or computers or tablets, and keep in mind they don't even have access to, for example, internet or electricity. So this is the challenges that you are dealing with, so something to think about and delve on. That was one. The other aspect, and it comes completely from my corporate background, is when we work on projects where we bring in massive changes, there is an element of change management. That plays a pivotal role. You can have the best laid plans, and you could have a great implementation strategy, but people have, if you don't do effective change management, there is rejection that happens, or delays that happens, or that sabotage the end result. And when I look at us as a society, we have we've been conditioned to a certain way of functioning and thinking, and we believe we've only been exposed to that. Now, we all are very good at criticizing and saying, I want a change. But when the change happens, how open are we to accept it, and how willing we are to support the thing in the face of ambiguity? We have a policy document, it's got the best intent. We will make mistakes, we will learn, and we will rectify. If we are not able to get the society to be with us on the same side, we will have more challenges. So, what I think should be thought through also is an awareness campaign that helps in explaining what we are doing, why we are doing, where we have the shortfalls, what we are working on, so that we can together move forward. And we need to have the society to understand, accept, and support this for us to be successful. Best laid plans get sabotaged with people internally, so we need to make sure that we take everyone with us as we move forward. I think that's my 2 bits from my experience.
Thanks, Raki. Thanks, Raki. I want to hear from Sean quickly. What are the challenges you think while implementing, or anything the government should reconsider?
Like others have said, I think implementation will be key, and the devil will be in the detail, as we say in the UK. I think my thoughts are that educational disadvantage can start at a very early age, and it's vitally important that all students can access high quality and well resourced education from the outset of their studies. I agree completely about the points about a digital disadvantage, for example, and access to learning resources. I think greater choice for students will demand access to robust, high-quality information, so that prospective students and their parents, advisors, and so on can make informed choices. So that's going to be really exciting. And I've spoken about what I see as perhaps one slight weakness of the document, and that's the focus on branch campuses. And I think partnership models can bring much more collaborative advantage. But overall, I think this is a very exciting development and will bring great opportunities and benefits.
Sure. Thanks, Sean. We are short of time, so I'll quickly take the questions. We had actually few questions. The policy talks about the choices for the students. It gives opportunities, so many choices, so many options. How it will address for the lack of exposure with the underprivileged or rural students, if the students coming from a less exposure background, how that will address?
Okay, my quick response to that this NEP, if you look at the document, in the implementation part of the document, has clearly said that it is going to be a multi-ministerial approach where it is going to coordinate with other ministries as well as the implementation pathway is getting laid. So one issue that needs to be addressed that benefits the socio-economically disadvantaged and the geographically disadvantaged because they are in rural areas is to create that infrastructure ecosystem as quickly as possible. And secondly, I find that this vocational education, which has been stigmatized to a certain extent, I think it's becoming an equalizing differentiator the way this NEP wants it to be. So I think on the positive side, this vocational education is receiving a major flip up, and that it's more an equalizer than a marginalizer because you said, vocational education means poor students will get it. No, now the vocational education is getting its due flavor, and you can just finish 1 year, go out, become successful, then come back for your diploma, go out, come back for your degree. So that modularity is built.
Yes.
So the vocational education, in my view, is also becoming an equalizer and a differentiator. So these two are my quick responses to the question.
Sure. I'll quickly move to the.
Sorry,
Yeah, Rakhi.
I wanted to just add, in the paper we've also talked about mentorship and counseling. So if you have that also implemented in combination, it will help give the direction to the students on options and opportunities and what they can work with. So
Sure.
I think that's a big boon as well.
Sure. Thank you, Raki. I'm summarizing two questions here. One is how many affiliated colleges will have the resources to become autonomy? That's one part. The second part is what will be the way forward for the institutions to become degree granting college or autonomous institutions. So I just summarize two questions.
Well, maybe
Professor
before
Kinta, you
you
can
ask me, so maybe I will take on that question.
Yes, sir.
How many institutions will have the financial ability to become, and that's where I talk about the cluster model or the mergers and acquisition models that will happen, and that will be probably giving them the financial clout that is required for becoming an autonomous institution. That will be the quick answer to the first part of the question that I foresee. If I see, in fact, I have been propagating the issues of new financial models for the education system now. Today's financial model is one-time payment and 1 year of service. This is what the whole financial model of the education system is today. And probably we will need new financial models for the education system. And that is probably, in my judgment, very, very important for the government to be fair enough in creating these new financial models for them to make the autonomy system to work better. And the second question was, Raghavan?
What will be the way forward, sir, from existing autonomous institutions or existing affiliated institutions to become a degree granting autonomous institution?
Well, obviously, the point that I mentioned in my earlier remark, and that is the quality, nothing more than that. In fact, these are the things that is need for the institution to become an autonomous institution. I think that is.
It was a wonderful discussion. It was enlightening for me. There were a lot of doubts, clarifications, which the people were talking about. We were able to hear from the panelists. It was one of the wonderful panelists. We did talk about how the affiliated college systems will transform to a university or an autonomous granting college. We did talk about the faculty, how they can build their skill system. We also talked about what are the autonomy will give to the institution, how they can become an autonomy institution, and very important, we did also talk about the funding part of it. So these are some of the quick pointers we did discussed in the last an hour or so conversation. From my point of view, my wholehearted thanks to all the panelists, Professor Vaidya, Professor Kincha, Professor Sean, and Raki. Thank you very much.